And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to Nick Redfern about his book, The NASA Conspiracies. Okay, Nick, finally, censored photos. I have even seen the pictures where there's the image of the moon or the image of Mars, and then it looks like somebody took their finger on wet ink and went and it's kind of smudged out. What's with that?
Yeah, I mean, there are some very weird stories about the moon and NASA, particularly in relation to, whether or not certain photographs and imagery has either been changed, altered, or outright, just not released into the public domain. And again, it's kind of like the story of Carl Wolf, that these stories sound amazing, like things about based on the moon. But it's the same with the censored photo issue, that we're actually getting this information from named credible sources who have had ties to NASA. Now, one of the people who's been, I guess, most vocal of all when it comes to this issue of censored photos is a woman named Donna Hare. And Donna Hare previously worked for a company called Philco, and this was a company that NASA contracted with at the start of the 1960s. And Philco basically provided NASA with a worldwide tracking station network for its Project Mercury flights, because NASA doesn't always, do do all the scientific and technical work itself, in terms of creating the spacecraft, etc. They contract it out to companies like Lockheed and McDonnell Douglas and people like that. And Donna Hare worked for one of these companies, Philco. And she's actually got a very prestigious background. She worked at the Houston, Texas Johnson Space Center in Building 8 in the photographic lab. And she actually won became the recipient, I should say, of a number of awards from NASA, including an Apollo Achievement Award. So, she's a very credible person. And she's gone on record as stating that when she was working in Building 8 in the photo lab at the Johnson Space Center, she was, on one occasion, got talking with one of the people who worked there, who basically showed her a photograph that showed for what, we would call a UFO, a flying saucer. And he confided in Donna Hare that one of his specific tasks was that he was charged with having to essentially censor the pictures, basically retouch them before they were declassified into the public domain. So, in other words, they would be modified or altered to remove any anomalies from them, anomalies being things like flying saucers. So, in other words, the photographs were being deliberately altered so that people on the outside wouldn't see what people on the inside had access to. And, of course, as I said, it sounds highly controversial until, you realize it's coming from a named, on-the-record person who was willing to stand up and say, hey, this is what I saw, this is what I was told. Now, NASA's been sort of conspicuously silent about this story of Donna Hare, but, it sort of has profound implications if photographic evidence of UFOs has been found and collected, and it's actually been denied to the general public to the extent that photographs and pictures have been altered. That's sort of a pretty bleak situation for when we're talking about supposed breaking down the frontiers of science and learning new data, but it's actually being covered up in the process,
But I thought it was more than just UFOs, where there are pictures of what look like, and I'm going to say man-made structures, or thought to be man-made structures, that they, there might be something going on in a crater, and it's just kind of wiped out.
Oh, yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, I should stress it doesn't. I just mentioned Donna Hare to start with, as that was sort of the most impressive one we have, and certainly because of her speaking out publicly, and because we can verify her employment with NASA. But no, I mean, we've seen other pictures as well that, or I should say, we've had testimony relative to certain pictures that should exist, but that have never surfaced. It's like they've vanished, they've gone into the organization, they haven't come out the other side, which is kind of, unfortunately, typical of what we often hear. And, when you hear that on a number of occasions, you see a trend developing, obviously. But, yeah, I mean, when it comes to things like this, I mean, we have photographs of craters that seem to show lights inside the craters. Other people have suggested what looks like massive mining operations on the surface of the moon. And the problem is, of course, we only have access to a certain number of photographs. We just don't simply know how many other pictures might have existed that could have told a bigger story of what was going on. Maybe somewhere somebody has these photographs, but even the ones we had access to are enough, certainly, to sort of get the alarm bells ringing, so to speak.
It sounds like NASA has a lot of involvement with UFOs, or at least trying to cover up UFOs, and maybe that's not the right word, extraterrestrial life.
Well,
even though they say that there isn't any, but it sounds like they spend a lot of energy in making it look that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the big question is, if there is a cover-up, why is it being done? I think the issue is not so much whether alien life exists and NASA or some elements of the government has found it, but why they feel the need to hide it from us. I think just by definition, the fact that alien life might exist and somebody found it, to me, that's not enough reason to hide the fact. There must be some overriding reason why, somebody has said we can never tell people what the truth is. And if it was just the case that, the government, President Obama or whoever, would sort of stand up one day and say, okay, we've decided to come clean that, yes, we did find evidence of alien visitations, and they came and they still come down again, but, we don't think they're harmful or whatever, but we wanted to let you know. To me, that doesn't seem reason enough to hide it. I think there has to be something more profound about the entire UFO phenomenon that has made certain people within NASA and the government say there's no way we can ever reveal this to the public. And I think a lot of it is probably related to belief systems as we see them and perceive them, relative to our history. People talk about, are some ancient religious texts, not actually relative to stories of gods and angels or etc., but could they be ancient stories that have been over time kind of, I won't say manipulated, but they've become distorted over time into, stories of demons and gods, but that might actually be visitations from literal aliens. What would that mean to the world's religious bodies? If you look, for example, at the way today religion causes no end of trouble, you have to look at things like the Middle East, and things, terrorism. A lot of it is based around religion. If a revelation was made that a lot of world religions have at their basis alien visitations, not the gods coming down, that could cause even more problems. And I think possibly there could be this idea has been discussed that, this is just too difficult for us to deal with, let's just not tell anybody. And I think that probably has a deep role in defining why, we haven't been confided in, if you like, with the truth.
With your commentary, it seems like if the proverbial UFO did land on the White House lawn or somewhere in the Middle East, it might end all the religious fighting, because they would figure out they've all been duped all these years and they have to come up with a new paradigm.
No, you're quite right. I think the biggest problem is that the people, you just made a great argument. The problem is people like me and you aren't the ones, pulling the strings and the money makers in government, etc., and the power players. And I think that the problem is that a small select body of people have made the decision for us, and I think they've made the wrong decision. Even if they feel, I don't paint all the people in government who hide in UFO data as being simplistically the bad guys. I think, that if people in government have uncovered a lot of significant data on UFOs, then they may well be in a very awkward position in terms of understanding what to do with it. I don't paint these as sinister people thwarting us at every step from getting the truth. I actually feel kind of sorry for some of them that they're in the position of dealing with a true unknown and not knowing how to handle it and being torn between telling people the greatest revelation for, thousands of years, or just sitting on it and never doing anything or saying anything about it. So I think, the big issue is that the people who've made the decisions have, however long ago the decisions were made, we're not going to tell anybody, and successive members of this select body have just gone along with the same approach, if you like, because it's the easiest thing to do. It's like the easiest thing in the world to do is not say anything. If you say anything, you by default, you have to make decisions and et cetera, et cetera. It's the easiest thing in the world never to do anything, So.
Jim Sparks, who identifies himself as an abductee, talks about in his book that the only way the government will reveal this knowledge, not just our government, but government would reveal this knowledge, is if we were able to forgive them and give them basically a free pass to all of the cover-up stuff and just, go, okay, we know you had to do it, but, let's just put it on the table and we're not going to criticize you because you had your reasoning, but just give us the truth. Yeah, and I thought that was a really interesting shift in energy.
No, I agree with you. I think the big problem is, from our perspective, is we keep trying to find ways to get the truth and for the government to tell us without realizing that the government doesn't want to do it. It's like, I understand the motivations of the people in the whole disclosure movement, and I think from having an enthusiastic approach to try and get governments to reveal the truth is a great thing. But the problem is, it forgets one critical issue, that for the most part, people in government don't want us to know what's going on. So in other words, no matter if we say we forgive you and, et cetera, if those people, regardless of, they don't care if we forgive them or not, they're the people in power. I think they just want to maintain the status quo and not have to admit to wrongdoings in the past. But equally, I think they just don't want to have to deal on a planetary-wide level with all the ramifications when, it's perceived as being such too big of a can of worms to have to deal with, that it's far easier just to lock it all away, I think. And, I don't see why the government, unfortunately, from our perspective, I don't see why the government would, reveal all this to us, because it doesn't serve them any purpose to do so other than make them look like a bunch of liars for the last 60 years.
But I think that's the concept of forgiveness, because we would just condemn them and say, you are a bunch of liars, get out of here, versus going, okay, we're going to leave you in power. I mean, we already don't trust you anyway, so, that's kind of a moot point.
I think the important thing is, I don't think governments care if we forgive them or not. It's just a case they just don't want to tell us, period. I don't actually think they're worried about what the man in the street's going to think about whether they've been lied to. I think they're more concerned about maintaining control and hysteria not breaking out if they do say anything. I think those are sort of the bigger issues that they're probably thinking along the lines of.
Do you think that NASA believes in UFOs?
Well, yeah, I think, as I said earlier, I think most people in NASA know nothing about the subject any more than they might know from just watching a TV documentary or reading a book or a magazine. In the same way, I don't think 99.9% of the people at the CIA know who killed Kennedy or what happened at Roswell. I think people assume when you enter governments and you enter these agencies that you're suddenly made privy to all the secrets, but, it just doesn't happen. So when you ask if, does NASA believe in UFOs, I'm quite sure that most of the people who work for NASA are working just on legitimate scientific programs, and that's all they think there is. They don't realize there's a small select body within NASA, rather than NASA as a whole, that knows more than it's telling. So I think this small body certainly believes in UFOs because they have the evidence. But the problem is when you have a clear, small, defined organization buried incredibly deeply within another organization, it becomes incredibly hard to find them and out them, if you like. And so because of that, I think that's why, the information has been so successfully hidden for so long. So, yes, I think there is a belief on on the part of certain people in NASA, but that's purely and simply down to the ones who are in the know, who've been, allowed access to whatever the big secret is. But, if you legitimately ask most people at NASA, even the Public Relations Office, when they say we have no information on UFOs, I don't believe they're lying. They're speaking honestly as they see it. They're just no more clear than the rest of us are. So.
When most people think of UFOs, however, they think Area 51. Is there a relationship between NASA and Area 51?
Well, actually, I talk about this in the book. One particular man I interviewed who worked at Area 51 a long time ago, back at the dawn in the 1970s, and he said that he read a number of briefing papers at Area 51 that dealt with things like crashed UFOs, alien autopsy reports, programs to try and understand and duplicate alien technology. Reportedly, this began back in the 40s, he said. He read reports, actually not related to Roswell, but to a couple of crash stories prior to Roswell, like from the early 40s, he said, which are obviously cases we don't know about. But he said that at Area 51 by 1970-71, that there was a team working there which was made up of military personnel, intelligence people, and also scientists from NASA. And they'd essentially been offered positions where they were taken out of their regular jobs, whether with the CIA or the NSA or NASA, and offered positions in this sort of clandestine, almost unacknowledged program, to look into the whole UFO issue. And, it was very much like an under-the-table type group where it officially didn't exist, and these people still technically held titles in their other agencies, if you like. So, in other words, the secret was protected and the people's jobs were protected in this new program. But he said that there was a NASA tie-in here with NASA having involvement at Area 51. So, which would make sense, if you've got scientists delving into extraterrestrial issues, and searching for phenomena in outer space, they would arguably be the people you'd want to get on board to consult with and talk with about, the whole UFO issues.
It just makes you wonder if some of the technology that they used in the space missions, the Apollo missions, the Gemini missions, or even on the space shuttle, is reverse engineered stuff that came out of Area 51.
Yeah, we just don't know. For example, people do point out that the capsule that the astronauts came back in, that's the one part of the craft that did look like a flying saucer. It is sort of like a flying saucer type capsule that the astronauts sat in when they went to the moon. It sat on top of a huge rocket, but the capsule itself looks like a UFO. So, I think that if UFOs have been captured or crashed or whatever, and we've analyzed them, and we're starting to understand the technology, it would make a lot of sense that we would kind of then integrate that into our own technology. And the biggest problem is that we might then claim it all as our own, and, there'll be no reason to reveal the astonishing alien technologies, because if we've duplicated them, we can claim them all along as our own, which, buries the secret even more then, unfortunately.
Do you think, well, now we've already covered that topic, so let's just move along. I'm just looking at the clock. We got 2 minutes before the music comes up. Let's talk for a couple of seconds about your new book that's coming out, because that's coming out in June, which is fast approaching, so we can kind of get a little head start and get the word out about that. What's the name of that, and what's that one about?
Well, it's called The Real Men in Black, and it's a study, as the book title probably tells you. It's a study of the entire Men in Black mystery from its beginnings back in the 40s and early 50s to the present day, and it looks at a whole range of theories for the Men in Black. Are they government agents? Are they aliens themselves? Some people think they could be time travelers, or is it a combination of different theories? So that's basically what the book's about. It's a comprehensive study of a lot of never-before-seen cases, a lot of witness interviews and interviews with a lot of the major players in the entire Men in Black research community, and as I said, addressing different theories as to what they might be. And to some degree, as I point out, maybe the Men in Black mystery doesn't have one answer. You know, there seem to be some indications that some of these Men in Black are government personnel, but others seem really weird, almost alien-like in themselves. So, you know, we could be having different types of Men in Black even, which, well, unfortunately complicates things even more, but it does make it sort of a great area of research, if you like.
And if they are just mystery men, kind of like what they might have done in ancient texts, we just kind of put them into a group and call them Men in Black because we don't know what they are.
Well, that's right. You know, I think anybody gets silenced in relation to UFOs, you know, we think we do put them into that sort of MIB category. But I think, you know, one of the things I've discovered doing the research is that it's not as clear-cut that the Men in Black are this or that. You know, it's several factors at work, I think.
And that's very possible. You know, we just don't have the vocabulary to differentiate them.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
When we're scrambling around still for answers as to who they are, you know, and it really does make it difficult to try and determine, you know, what they're doing, where they're coming from, which are evidence of this category or that category, etc. So.
Oh, I was going to say the music's going to come. Nick, thanks again for coming on the show. You're always a pleasure to have. And
I'll see you tomorrow.
I'll be back, you know, in September sometime after the next new book comes out. And yes, I'll see you tomorrow at the History, Haunts, and Legends Conference in Jefferson, Texas. Excellent. That's Nick Redfern. His webpage is nickredfern.com. His book, The NASA Conspiracies, great book, interesting reading. Buy it. Oh, next week. Wait. Next week. First hour, we have James Twyman talking about Awaken to Your Divine Purpose. In the second hour, I have an exclusive interview with former Governor Jesse Ventura. We're going to talk about what the government doesn't want you to know. So, till next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. Till then, be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just